So welcome to the Future Talks conversation between myself, Luke Hatton, and Toni Coulson, Net Zero Lead at Starling Bank. Today, we're going to be chatting about our backgrounds a little, sustainability, and both of our perspectives on all things net zero. So to kickstart, Toni, firstly, thank you very much for joining us. I'm quite interested to hear how your journey started out. Sustainability and net zero is obviously quite a hot topic now and quite a relevant one. And it's something that every business is going to need to address. And you've been leading this at Starling Bank, and I'm really interested to hear why you took on this important role.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Luke, and thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this. So I joined Starling about 18 months ago, and I think it was maybe day 2 or day 3. The CEO, Anne Bowden, gave me a call and said, I've got something really exciting that I want to get you involved in. I want you to support on. Are you up for it? And didn't know what she was talking about, but you do not say no to your CEO 2 or 3 days into a new role. So I said, yeah, great. Sounds fun. Let me get involved. And that little project, as it was at the time, was net zero. Now my background is not sustainability. I do have some experience in it. So I was head of investor relations at a previous bank where we touched on what was corporate social responsibility at the time, and obviously the environment formed part of that. But I'm by no means a sustainability expert as such. But it's an area that I'm really passionate about and get really excited about. And actually my day job, if you like, at the bank is in the asset management team, and that means that I look after a number of our loans and investments which are not originated to our direct customer base, and within that the vast majority at the moment is mortgages. And as I've gone on my journey and Starling's journey around what net zero means for us and how we can make a big difference, which I'm sure we'll get on to later on, one of the biggest things a bank can do is look at the emissions that they finance through either their lending activities or their investment activities. And so it is aligned to the day job to an extent in terms of how I can think about what I do in my day job with a slightly different perspective and have that sustainability angle. But it's also really exciting initiative in the bank for me to get involved in and meet people across the organization. So that was sort of how it came about, and also why I'm really interested in it and why I want to continue to lead this across Starling. And thinking about you, Luke, so I understand that you were president of the Oxford Climate Society when you were at university. What made you put yourself forward for that and get involved in all of this stuff as well?
Yeah, so it's actually quite an interesting story. I didn't intend to go into the president role. I've always really been interested in climate and sustainability ever since sort of pre-university, even GCSE. I remember studying geography and thinking, why isn't everyone talking about climate change? Why isn't this the issue that everyone wants to go on to work in? And so I really guided my education towards that. So I studied engineering at Oxford, and with the aim of going into something low carbon technology. And in the first term, I saw this advert for the School of Climate Change, which is an 8-week-long seminar series that the Oxford Climate Society puts on. And the idea is that it's meant to fill in some of the gaps through the current degree courses, which are very specialized. So you don't really get that much interaction with climate change beyond, say, for example, in my case, thermodynamics relating to energy technologies. So it covered the whole broad range of economics, policy, physical science. And I just really loved that. I really loved meeting loads of other people who are really passionate about it. And so that was sort of my first interaction with the Climate Society. And from there on, I just was looking for as many opportunities as possible to stay in this community and contribute to some of the work that it does. So it also does, as well as the educational courses, we put on speaker events, so similar to these sort of style of events, and also put on socials and things like that. So eventually I got involved with the sort of financial side. So I was the treasurer in my second and third year, and had planned to be the vice president or applied to be the vice president in my final year. But unfortunately, we didn't have anyone apply for president because it can be quite a demanding job. And I remember the previous president sort of taking me aside and suggesting, oh, why don't you try out for this role? Why don't you, it's done on our election sort of system. Why don't you hust for it? So put your name forward for it. I was a little apprehensive at first. It did feel like a lot of responsibility that I wasn't prepared for initially, but there was very much a lot of support from the other people in the team, from the previous presidents and vice presidents, and I really enjoyed the role. I'm glad I took that step up and didn't just stay involved at sort of lower level. So really, it's been a great experience in terms of meeting loads of other people who are passionate about climate change and learning more about topics on climate and net zero that I wasn't really aware of before. And it's definitely honed my desire to go into climate and energy related topics. So I guess the next thing I was quite interested to ask you about, so having developed all this knowledge on sustainability and climate change, I'm quite interested to hear about the sustainability initiatives at Starling Bank, and if there's one in particular you'd particularly want to pinpoint from your experience.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and something that we get asked a lot. So we're part of a number of forums, one being Tech Zero, which I know is leading this, and quite often when we speak on panels at the likes of Tech Zero, we get that question of what one thing can you do to make a difference? And I think the reality is, it's as you'll know from everything that you've done, Luke, it's a rapidly evolving sector, and things therefore change quite quickly. And so I don't think there is a sort of a one initiative that will change the world. It's a culture and an ethos that I think is what really drives change. And so the thing that we have done at Starling, that we are doing, that we continue to do, because it's not something that you just tick a box and it's done overnight, is to really drive that education and awareness. And I think the minute you've got that education and awareness, and it's built within your culture of what makes up the organization, that is when you will start to see real change. And an analogy that I quite often use is, if we go back sort of 5-10 years ago, diversity and inclusion was made the problem of HR and nothing changed. The minute it became everyone's problem and everyone's issue to solve, we really started to see change move forward in that. Obviously there's still a long way to go, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, and we feel the same as that when it comes to sustainability and being environmentally friendly within the organization. So we don't have, we say I lead on net zero stuff. I'm not a head of sustainability. I'm not a head of ESG or whatever you want to call it. And that's not necessarily to say that other organizations that have that role are not doing it correctly. It's just not the way that we want to do it. And so what we've got instead, which I absolutely love, and I love having sessions with them because the ideas that come out of it is amazing. We've got what we call our green shoots ambassadors. And so we have ambassadors across the organization in different offices, in different teams at different levels. And there's probably about 20 of us so far. And we come together on a monthly basis to talk about what we're seeing in terms of developments in the market, what we're seeing in terms of what's happening with Starling. So for example, we've got our latest carbon footprint audit, which we're going out to the green shoots ambassadors over the next couple of weeks to say, this is what our footprint is, these are the key drivers. And when we announce it to the organization, those will be our key expert people within the teams to really embed that down. So everyone's got an understanding of what it is and what is driving our emissions. And similarly, we use those people to bring ideas to us, because our future leaders like yourselves and some of the new recruits that we've got, and people in all parts of the organization, have amazing ideas that we can then filter up through these green shoots ambassadors, and that can drive change. So I would say, in terms of the sustainability initiative, that is the thing which I'm most passionate about and proud of as an organisation, because we're really starting to see how that's working. And if I just give you an example, because it's always nice to bring these things to life, I had someone contact me about a month or so ago, someone I've never met before in our Cardiff office, and she sent me a message on Slack. She said, can we have a quick 10 minutes? I want to brainstorm some ideas with you around something that I need to do for a careers fair. So we found 10 minutes, and she was looking to create almost like business card type things that she can hand out at careers fairs for people to then take home and then log on and see what careers are at Starling. And she got in touch with the design team to say, can you create a lovely design for these cards? And the design team said, have you thought about what materials you're using, or how you're going to distribute them, or where you're going to get them made? Go and have a chat with Toni, and just have a brainstorm to make sure that what we're doing is thinking through the impacts on the environment. And it's little things like that where you think these things are not going to completely change the emissions associated with the business, but the more that we do that, and the more that we work as a collective to reduce our environmental impact, the bigger the impact will be. And it's something which doesn't cost us anything. It's really fairly easy to implement, and it brings together the passion from so many people in the organization to drive this change forward. So yeah, that I would say is probably the one thing, if I had to pinpoint one thing that I'm really proud that we're doing at Starling.
That's really good to hear. I know from talking to other friends, they talk about, oh, are you going into career and sustainability? And one of the responses to them that I had a couple of weeks ago actually was, well, kind of every career now needs to have that sort of sustainability angle. It shouldn't be something that's just coming down from the top or in a certain division. It should be something that's included in every job role and something that everyone is thinking about. So it's really good to hear that that's happening at Starling Bank.
Yeah, definitely. I think it has to be inherent within the culture and ethos of the business. Well, I say it does. That's my view. I mean, tell me what's your view? What do you expect from a company when it comes to things like sustainability?
Yeah, and this has been a difficult question, and one that I've been asking myself quite a lot during sort of job search over the past year, because I'm obviously very passionate about climate change and sustainability. And so wanting to go into a career in that, I would want the organization that I'm working for to share those values, to share that commitment. So it's been a really important factor for me, knowing what the company is doing, whether they have targets on net zero, on sustainability in the environment. But it's often been quite difficult to find that information. A lot of companies like to present a certain side or seem like they're doing sustainability related stuff. So it's been something that I've found quite important to ask in interviews, and it's been interesting to hear what people's views are in people in jobs not related to, say, sustainability in the company. So not being the head of sustainability, what their attitudes are towards sustainability. I mean, the careers that I was looking at in sort of sustainable energy, it was sort of natural that a lot of the people shared the same sort of passion and caring for the environment and caring about climate change. So it has been a very important factor for me when thinking about a future career. And I know for a lot of friends as well, increasingly it has been something that they've been considering, and it feels very important to them, as well as the other sort of factors like company culture and diversity and inclusion.
Interesting that you say that. It's been difficult to find those things, because we have had and continue to have discussions internally around what should we be including in our job adverts and our induction programs, and you speak to some people in the organization and they say, well, sort of, what's that got to do with the environment? And actually it doesn't have much to do with protecting the environment, but it's around who you attract, and not just attracting people like yourselves who want a career in sustainability as such, but also just what people expect now, and what particularly I think younger generations expect is really important.
But as we're talking about sort of employees and their interests and their passion for the environment and all things CSR. I noticed that on which.com, I actually have a Starling Bank app, but that you've got the highest customer score of all UK banks. I can definitely attest to that. I've enjoyed having a Starling account, especially whilst traveling. So firstly, congratulations. And secondly, how high up the priority list do you think being kind to the environment and caring about sustainability, embedding it in your sort of company culture is to your customers, let alone your potential and existing employees?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I would say more generally, one of the reasons why we consistently score very highly in terms of customer service and customer satisfaction is because we listen to our customers. We genuinely do. I know that sounds quite cliche, and everyone says that they listen to their customers, but I don't sit necessarily in a customer facing function, and I will get notifications of Twitter messages or Instagram messages, and this is what a customer said, or this is what a customer is suggesting we do. And we have a lot of forums internally, and we do a lot of interviews with customers, both personal and business, to get ideas for what they want. And what we've seen probably over the past, I would say 6 to 12 months, maybe since COP26, as there's been more publicity around it, we are getting more and more feedback from customers that directly relates to our position when it comes to the environment, which for me personally is really nice to see. And then I think that another statistic from sort of 2021 is we were the most switched to bank in 2021, and if you look at our Refer a Friend program, I'm not sure if you've used it, but we plant a tree for every friend that is referred. And you've got a lot of other banks out there who offer monetary gifts, if you like, for Refer a Friend, so £50 here, £100 there. And so the fact that now we've not interviewed every customer to ask if they referred a friend because we plant a tree, but if you look at those statistics, it shows that customers are not just motivated by money, they are more motivated by a broader proposition, if you like. And I was actually just reading an article last week in Finextra, which referenced a survey conducted by Kearney. I don't know if I've pronounced that right, so apologies if I haven't. And that stated that 40% of UK customers were happy to pay 5 or 10% more for a product that was ESG. Yeah. Which I think is really powerful, especially now given the cost of living crisis. The fact that people are still willing to pay a little bit more, obviously not a lot more, but a little bit more, says a lot. And the same survey said 1 in 10 customers would switch their banking provider if their current provider wasn't a sustainable bank. Now that for me is hugely powerful, not least because we're very well positioned for this, and we always have been and we always will be, but because it really shows what customer behaviors are gravitating towards and what customers want, and ultimately as a business which thrives to do the best thing for the customer, that's the type of insight that we want to hear. And I think it's great, not just for us but for society in general, that customers are pushing and driving for that change. I mean, you yourself, Luke, say that you're a customer, which is great to hear, and I'm so glad you've had a good experience, like many others. But when you're looking at products, not just banking products, but more broadly, how much do you consider the sort of the environmental position or the broader corporate social responsibility position that a business puts themselves in when choosing who you want to buy goods, services from?
Yeah, so I'd say increasingly, just now that because there's more data on it, it's more clear which brands are more sustainable, which aren't. I definitely make a concerted effort to try and buy more sustainably. It is interesting that sort of 5 to 10% figure. I think that would probably line up with around where I would say, so probably maybe up to 20%, depending on what, say, the good or service would be. For example, on my weekly shop or things like that, opting for something which I would consider more sustainable, has certain certifications or things like that. And definitely from talking to others, so other friends and things like that, they also share the same thing, the same views. So they're also prepared to pay that little bit extra if it means that they can contribute better to the world, or I guess contribute less negatively to the world through that purchase. So it's been really interesting thinking about it, because when I was much younger, that wasn't something I thought about at all. It's only been over the last few years that that's really become a consideration. I've really started to think, where is my money going towards? What companies am I supporting? How am I essentially voting with my money towards companies that are more or less sustainable? I think it is easy to focus on to make that decision if you're in a better financial situation. So obviously with the cost of living crisis and everything, it is more difficult at times to say purchase sustainably, but often as well, and I don't know if this is the same in finance, but for example, I'm vegetarian, and that is often cheaper than eating a meat-based diet. And I wonder if it's similar in sort of investments and loans, whether the sort of more sustainable products are becoming not only the products that people will pick because they want them to be more sustainable, but also that they are sort of the way the market's leaning towards. I know, for example, in energy, especially with everything going on with the gas prices at the moment, clean energy is the way for it. It's not only more sustainable, but it's more economically viable. So I think it's been interesting to look back on that, and hopefully similar in sort of financial sector.
Yeah, I mean, our bank account is free, as you know. My personal view is that you shouldn't have to pay to do the right thing. One of our core values is do the right thing, and that should just be a given almost, especially in financial services. It has to have the utmost integrity. I guess it's our job as part of the financial services industry to make sure that the more sustainable products are accessible. And so it's really interesting to hear your views on that as well. And I agree that being sustainable doesn't or shouldn't mean that you have to spend more money. And yeah, I think it's, as I say, it's the job of not just us, but every corporate to make sure that essentially that's the case, that it is accessible and it doesn't have to come at a premium.
That's great to hear, and I think I would very much agree. It is the responsibility of companies, and to some extent as well the government, to ensure that those decisions doing the right thing is not more expensive or costly. So yeah, I'm interested to hear. So Starling is obviously a relatively new bank, so started in 2014, I think. Was sustainable banking always part of the plan, or has it evolved as it's become a more public discussion? I know you mentioned doing the right thing has always been the sort of motto or focus of the bank, so interested to hear more about that.
You'll quite often hear our founder and CEO, Anne Bowden, say that when just after the financial crisis, so she'd been in banking for many years, and after the financial crisis, she felt ashamed to be a banker because of what happened during that period. And Starling essentially was born out of her ambition to create a bank which she was no longer ashamed of, which listened to customers, which put customers first, which was ethical, which did responsible lending. And so whilst I would say that sustainability wasn't necessarily the core focus for the bank then, doing the right thing always was. And ultimately doing the right thing is doing the right thing by your customers, by your community, by your environment. And so even if we go back to sort of day one, we've always been digital led. We've never had branches. We've got cloud-based technology, and we use AWS, which it has got a net zero strategy and offset some of its emissions as well. We were the first in the UK to launch a MasterCard debit card which was made out of recycled plastic. We're paperless to the extent possible. We've never directly invested in fossil fuels. So I think whilst I would say net zero strategy and sustainability hasn't always been number one on the priority list, it's very much built within the ethos of the bank, and we will continue to uphold the utmost integrity and ethical practices when it comes to banking. We're part of a number of industry bodies, so obviously Tech Zero being one. We're founding members. We work with the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which is a collective of financial services firms, both nationally and internationally. It's a global body which works very closely with the science-based target initiatives around creating commonality and measuring emissions for lending and investments for the financial services, for example. So I would say that ethical banking has always been part of the plan, and with that comes sustainability. We have developed our journey significantly, particularly as the broader sector has evolved when it comes to climate change, climate risk, and sustainability. And so we have placed more focus on it, and we will continue to do so. But ultimately, it just comes back to that core value of doing the right thing and creating a bank that we're all proud of and that our customers want to be a part of as well.
Yeah, I'm interested actually. Do you think, so obviously Starling Bank and some of the other, I guess, challenger banks have really grown in popularity and in sort of their user base over the last few years. Do you think steps towards being a more ethical bank as compared to some of the more established banks, do you think that's been putting pressure on them to change, to adjust, to make themselves more sustainable? Or do you think they're still sort of rooted in their old ways, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think what's quite interesting, gone to your earlier point around us consistently being voted top or near the top in terms of customer service. As you say, we're a really new bank, and so for us to do that in such a short space of time, and others around us, other similar organisations, is really quite impressive. And it definitely has put pressure on some of the big banks to adapt their digital journeys because of what we've got. And I'd like to hope that as we continue to do as we continue to do this for the environment, does that not necessarily put pressure on the bigger banks, but does it give them almost a bit of a catalyst to also move if customers essentially start, I say voting with their feet, but voting with switching their bank accounts.
Yeah.
And I really hope it does. That said, some of the big banks, it's a bit like trying to get the Titanic to do a U-turn versus a speedboat. We're much smaller, we're more agile, we start from scratch, and it's a lot easier to build some of these things from scratch than what it is to change them. And as part of some of the working groups and industry bodies that we're part of, I've had conversations with a number of the big banks, and their ambition is definitely there, and they're trying to take steps to make changes. But it's so difficult when you're such a big organization. It's not to say it's impossible, and it's not to say that they don't need to do more. I'm not saying that at all. But it's just much easier for us to make a difference than what it is for them, because we're starting at almost we've got a different starting line because of the way in which we've been built. But I do absolutely hope that the more we continue to do the right thing, and the more that we create competition in that market because of it, the more it will almost force some of the other businesses in our sector to make the changes that they should be making for the good of the environment and all of the customers.
I like your point about the sort of Titanic versus the speedboat. I know this was something I was discussing with a friend who was also studying engineering at university, and he's also quite interested in sustainability and climate change. And we were discussing whether going into, say, a big energy company like BP or Shell, what difference you can make versus, say, going into sustainable energy or a more ethical area. And whether it's such a big ship. So even if you're having such a minuscule change, a certain percentage change in their emissions, whether that would be better than, say, going to work in a more ethical firm. And it was really something that I hadn't thought about much. I'd always thought, oh, I would never go to work to one of those companies because the culture is so focused, or the business model is so focused on extractive industries and is so tied up with those commercial interests and contributing to climate change. But it really did make me sort of stop and consider, oh, these big institutions, these big companies, they're going to have to change if we're going to reach net zero, or by 2050 or earlier.
Yeah, completely. And like you say, in an organization such as that, you can make what is deemed a small difference in that organization, but actually on the whole, it's much bigger than a huge difference in an organization which is already quite sustainable. And so it does beg the question around, well, what is going to have the greatest impact?
Yeah.
And I guess, for you talk about speaking to your friend there, your generation and other generations, but particularly your generation, has a real passion for the environment. And we saw all of the protests around COP26 and even since then. And I think the noise that's being created by people like yourselves and the attention that's being brought to the environmental crisis is really getting businesses and governments to some extent to almost forcing them to act on it. I mean, what's your view at the moment on the current state of affairs? Do you fear for the future of the planet? Are you hopeful? Well, where do we go essentially?
It's a difficult one. I think it's really easy to get bogged, especially with the media, to get bogged down in sort of very pessimistic views on the environment, and we're all doomed and it's no use trying. But I was talking to my tutor at my college a couple of days ago. It was my graduation, and we were discussing this, whether we felt optimistic or pessimistic about the world. And we kind of came to the conclusion that, yes, it may be on a bad trajectory. We're not near where we need to be for 1.5 or 2 degrees, limiting global warming to that. But that shouldn't be a reason to lose hope, because every half a degree, every 1/10 of a degree is something. It's much better than it could be. So I think it's very easy at times to lose hope and think that we're all doomed. But there's also a lot going on, especially compared to 5-10 years ago, even looking before COP26. It's something, energy and climate change wasn't something that I discussed with a lot of my friends, apart from those who are sort of passionate about it. But increasingly, it's become something that everybody's been talking about. It's been on the focus in seemingly most industries now, especially with the sort of gas price rises. And I think it has made me a little bit optimistic, politics aside, that it is being spoken about more, that there is more focus on net zero and sustainability and climate change. Whether that's all viable, whether it's just a sort of buzzwords in some companies, whether they're just presenting a false front, I'm not sure, but it's definitely much more on the conversation, much more spoken about, which I think is the most important thing. A few years ago, I did a sort of Q&A on Oxford University's Instagram, and one of the questions was, well, what can I do personally to help with climate change? And I think the most important thing is to start to have conversations about it, start to talk about issues like net zero and sustainability, even if you're not in an industry that's directly related to that. As we were saying earlier, it's something that's going to affect all businesses and needs to be in the culture of every organization, really.
It's a really interesting one as well, because I know, like what you're saying about the media, and obviously what we've seen recently just with the effects of climate change. So we see a lot more flash flooding, we see record temperatures. I mean, I'm from Newcastle and I live in London, and I can't cope with the heat in the summers anymore. It's far too hot. And then obviously the impacts of that in terms of what does it mean for food production? What does it mean for supply chains? and like you say, if you read everything in the news and you see what's happening, it's very easy to almost want to just bury your head in the sand because it feels like it's too big of a problem. And if I think about financial services specifically, so there was a publication in 2021 from, I think it was Greenpeace and WWF, which looked at the UK financial services industry and concluded that the industry was responsible for 1.8 times as much domestic emissions in the UK. So that's essentially UK financial services is responsible for nearly double domestic emissions. And if it was a country in the world, it would be the 9th most emitting country. Now, I read that and I think that is quite terrifying. But take a step back, it's a massive opportunity because the difference that we can make as a sector is huge. If we can get that under control and do something about it, that the global impact is massive. And obviously that's one of the reasons why we as a bank are quite passionate about it, but also we get involved in these industry bodies, these working groups, these forums, because we will be much more successful as a collective than any of us will be individually. And there's a couple of things that you mentioned there in terms of when you're speaking to your friends, what can individuals do to have the biggest impact? And thinking about those stats around the UK financial services industry, if each of us as individuals, and this is me personally, not just me as Starling, if each of us look at who we bank with or who our pension is with, that will actually have a massive impact in itself. Because you asked earlier about whether we as a challenger bank community can drive bigger businesses to change. Actually, customers are much more powerful than that, than what we are. And if customers start moving away from that because of investment in fossil fuel industries or not taking enough action to reduce the environmental impact, that will force businesses to change. There's a number of resources out there. I don't know if you've come across Switch It Green or Bank Green, which essentially compare banks, and they're completely independent. I can sit here and talk all day about how amazing we are, but so does every other bank, and that's it. Going to an independent source such as those is obviously much more powerful from a consumer perspective. And there's also a campaign led by Richard Curtis, Make My Money Matter, which is around pensions. And I read that and I was astonished. I mean, moving your pension to an ESG fund is 21 times more impactful than getting renewable energy, going vegan, recycling, all of those combined. That is massive. And so as a consumer, sorry, I get a bit passionate about this, but I couldn't believe that statistic. And here I am working in financial services. And so climate change does worry me, but I also think there's such a massive opportunity for us as a collective to really make a difference and set that standard for ethical and sustainable banking.
I've really thought about that at all, and that statistic is impressive. Yeah, when I start my job, I'll have to double check where the pensions are going towards, and hopefully it's somewhere very sustainable and not related to fossil fuels at all. I know it was a big thing at university, trying to pressure the university to divest its endowment funds from fossil fuel related and other non-ethical investments. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about at all, where your money is and what impact it's doing and it's having. I'm impressed that it outweighs sort of all of those sustainable low carbon lifestyle choices that you can make.
But then it makes sense when you look at
the
emissions that the UK financial services sector is responsible for. It's quite staggering.
Yeah, so I get, would you say that's the biggest issue to tackle in sustainability? In your opinion, do you think it's what should people be focusing on in reaching net zero and reducing their carbon footprint? And what do you think the future looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as an industry, that we've got a huge responsibility to make a difference, and I think that the way in which we tackle that is through collaboration and accountability. And I think collaboration needs to be driven by us, and we will with, I mean, obviously there's anti-competitive laws and people need to have a USP in order to build a business. I get all of that, but this is a massive issue, and there's huge amounts of opportunity there that we can absolutely work together to find solutions that work for us, that work for customers, that work for the environment. And through that collaboration, I think we'll get there a lot quicker, and we need to get there quicker, because this is not a future problem, this is a now problem. And then when I think about accountability, that is where I think customers come into it. And from what we talked about earlier, customers, and I know that you're really passionate about it, customers have to hold businesses to account, because the minute they start doing that, businesses have to take action. And I'd like to think that we do that anyway. But if our customers turn around to us tomorrow and said, we need you to do this, we need you to do that, that is the first thing that we would look at, because we listen to our customers first. And whether a company listens to their customers first, or they listen to them after they see the profit line at the bottom start to diminish, they will ultimately listen to customers. And so I think that the biggest issue is obviously reducing our emissions and reducing our environmental impact. But the way in which we do that, I think, is through collaboration as an industry, and then accountability, which ultimately I think will come from customers now and in the future.
Is there anything that makes you pessimistic about? I know we've spoken about the optimism, but is there anything that particularly that makes you pessimistic?
I think we all have to continue to pull and push in the same direction. There's a lot of, as you touched on earlier, there's a lot of changes that need to be driven by the government as well. And so the sooner we've got a more sustainable government, I think the better for all of us in that regard as well. And then from a business point of view, we just need to keep pushing in the same direction, and we will get there.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining me for the future talks. I really enjoyed our conversation about net zero and sustainability. And yeah, it's really made me a bit more optimistic about what businesses are doing and can and should and will be doing to achieve net zero and decarbonize their operations, especially in industries which aren't directly related to, I guess, aren't big emitters if you think about it in terms of scope 1 and 2.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute privilege to chat with you, Luke. It's great to hear from a happy customer as always, but also lovely to hear from you in terms of what you want to see and what your expectations are. And I'll definitely take that back to the drawing board for our next Green Ambassadors meeting.
That's brilliant. Glad to hear it. Thank you very much.